Hello, I am Amy Norgaard, and today I am presenting outcomes from the regional field trials of our research project focused on improving organic vegetable farm sustainability through enhanced nitrogen and phosphorus management. So the overall goal of nutrient management is to balance productivity and land stewardship, and this means to meet crop needs without excess and to do so across a diversity of farms and soils here in BC. We did this, our approach is that we calculated the crop requirements, aka this crop removal value, and we applied this amount. Compost and manures are commonly used on organic farms as important sources of nitrogen and phosphorus. However, a common practice is to apply these amendments at a rate that targets the crop nitrogen demand, but when we do this, because of the mismatch between what the crop requires and what these amendments supply, we tend to over-apply phosphorus. So a solution is to reduce the application to meet crop phosphorus demands instead. However, we come up short in terms of nitrogen. So another option, or one option to top up the crop nitrogen requirements, is to use a specialty organic fertilizer, and the fertilizer we used in this project is organic feather meal. So the three treatments that we trialed are listed here on the left, and I'm going to briefly describe them in terms of the nutrient source and the target nutrient, and the theoretical outcomes in terms of nitrogen and phosphorus. So this first strategy, high compost, is applying compost at a rate to target crop nitrogen demand. There's no fertilizer being applied, and the theoretical outcomes are that we're meeting crop nitrogen requirements, but we're applying phosphorus in excess. The next treatment, low compost plus nitrogen, is applying compost at a reduced rate to target crop phosphorus requirements, and then we're topping up nitrogen requirements with that feather meal fertilizer. And the outcomes here are, in theory, to meet and not exceed nitrogen and phosphorus requirements. The third treatment is the typical nutrient application for each crop on each farm, and they were varying combinations of compost and fertilizers or nothing at all, and so therefore the outcomes were highly variable as well. These strategies were tested in field trials for 2 seasons in 2018 and 2019 on 20 vegetable farms across 3 regions, Pemberton, Fraser Valley, and Vancouver Island. These strategies were evaluated in terms of 5 different outcomes that we measured, and I'm going to focus briefly on explaining our measurements and our findings. However, I've also included slides with figures of our data, and you can pause the video at these slides if you'd like to see that in more detail. And so if this data is of interest to you, you can also pause here on this slide and read this brief description of how to interpret those figures. So an indicator of farm productivity that we measured is yield, and we did not find differences in yield between the nutrient management strategies when the data was averaged over regions and years. However, in 2019, in the Fraser Valley only, yields were greater in the high compost plots than the typical plots. Here's the data. An indicator of the impacts to soil carbon balance that we measured is one soil carbon pool, which is called P.Ag, which stands for permanganate oxidizable carbon. And when averaged over regions and years, we did not find differences in P.Ag between the nutrient management strategies. An indicator of nitrogen use efficiency as well as environmental impact is post-harvest available nitrogen, and we did not find differences among the nutrient management strategies when we averaged the data over regions and years. However, some plots did have post-harvest nitrate concentrations that are higher than the regulations that are currently being phased in British Columbia, and you can go to this link to learn more about those regulations. An indicator of phosphorus use efficiency as well as environmental impact is post-harvest available phosphorus, and we found that post-harvest available phosphorus was 21% higher in the high compost plots than the low compost plots. An indicator of the economic feasibility of the nutrient management strategies is input costs, and we found that these were not different among the nutrient management strategies when averaged over regions and years. However, in the Fraser Valley only, both the high compost and low compost plots, so our research plots, had higher input costs than the typical plots. So overall, across all regions, no clear trade-off between nutrient management strategies was found. However, specifically in the Fraser Valley, we did find yields higher in the high compost plots than the typical plots. We also found higher post-harvest phosphorus in the high compost plots than the low compost plots. Input costs were higher in our research plots than the typical plots. And finally, we observed trends that post-harvest nitrogen was higher in the high compost plots when compost with high nitrogen content were used. However, overall variation in management, soil, and compost were stronger influences on these outcomes that we measured than the nutrient management strategies themselves. So finally, a huge thank you to all of the farmers that participated and the funders, which all made this research possible. And if you'd like more information, you can get in touch with any of the researchers behind this project, or you can visit our website to find out more information about some of the other projects we're working on. Thanks for listening.